Welcome. Today we'll be discussing psychedelic integration, but just wanted to raise a point before we begin the interview that we are by no means advocating for psychedelic use to treat mental health disorders, but as we've seen a rise in big pharma investing within the psychedelic space, as well as psychiatrists being more open to using psychedelics in clinical practice, we thought it was relevant to have this conversation and go deeper into how psychedelic integration works to help you in your healing process. I hope you enjoy today's episode and thank you for being here today. Have you ever thought about psychedelic integration? Today and in this episode, we will explore healing with psychedelics and the integration tools we can apply to deepen our healing experiences with Amánda Argot, who is a mental health advocate specialized in psychedelic integration. She bridges sacred traditions and science in the wellness and psychedelic space and has an MSc from King's College London in neuroscience and psychology of mental health, where her research was focused on the effects of psilocybin for psychotherapy for mental health outcomes. Amánda, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm really excited to kick off the conversation and hear your insights on all of this space, because I realize it's become a lot more popular when it comes to as a healing modality, but also in understanding the depths of what integration really entails, which I think is something that's very misunderstood. So in your opinion, I'd love to kick off this conversation with why have psychedelics become such a sought after healing mechanism?
Yeah, so you're right. Psychedelics are really now very trendy, not only in popular culture, but in public policy, in investment and business, in regulation, but also in science and healthcare and in wellness in general. And, I really feel it's because at this stage, so many people are suffering from mental health, from this disconnection. We see mental health now and mental illness, not just as a series of symptoms, but a real dis-ease, a disconnection from the body, from others, from the natural world. And psychedelics are offering a promise for these people where traditional pharmacological medications aren't working for them. So there's a lot of research now studying the effects of psychedelics together with psychotherapy for depression, for generalized anxiety disorder, for nicotine addiction, for substance abuse, for opioid addictions, for eating disorders, and the list goes on. And so this is a tool. This is one of the tools now that we have that we're looking into for people who are just tired of just treating their symptoms with pharmacological drugs. Because what these medicines do, these psychedelics do, is they actually look at root causes. They go really into the stories of why people are suffering the way that they are.
Yeah, 100%. And as a modality and a tool, what would you say helps us heal? How do psychedelics help us heal our mind and nervous system?
Yeah, so psychedelics, there is some science here. It's not just obviously the transpersonal effects of psychedelics. So some psychedelics are actually shown to induce structural and functional neuroplasticity, which acts on serotonergic 2A receptors and the capacity to create new neurons and wiring patterns in the brain, which really gives us the ability to adapt and to change, to learn new things, and might even induce creative cognitive abilities. And some psychedelics are also showing to activate neurogenesis in the hippocampus, which improves spatial learning and memory in performance-related tasks. At the same time, they're also being shown to decrease activity in the default mode network, which we like to call the seat of the ego, the area responsible for self-referential thought and introspection. And this area is really often very activated in people who have depression, anxiety, who are known for having these rigidity in their thought patterns and ruminations. And so these findings, just from the cognitive perspective, they're really tremendous for us. And it's a reason why we're so excited about these substances for our mental health. It shows that whatever processes that have been coded over years of destructive patterns are really allowing us to now have this flexibility to adapt. And also how we can, heal the mind and the body with these substances. On an emotional level, psychedelics can help us to expand our vocabulary for emotions. They help us to reacquaint with these feelings and using our bodies as a signal for locating them. Mm-hmm. So when we feel an uncomfortable emotion like anger or fear, psychedelics help us to observe them with more non-attachment, similar to a mindfulness meditation practice. And it really helps us to give us the tools to begin to work with these emotions with more ease. I like to say that they help us get out of our own way, so to speak.
Yeah, they definitely help facilitate like a whole new perspective. And I'd love to know more about like your personal journey as a practitioner. What brought you into this space of wanting to specialize in psychedelics and integration specifically?
So for me, my journey into the psychedelics world was actually a personal one. I myself was suffering from mental illness, and I was a walking pharmacy. I was trying all kinds of pharmaceutical drugs to help me for my symptoms. But over the years, they just weren't working for me anymore. And I wanted to really go into why I was suffering the way I was, and not just to take something just to make the pain go away, so to speak. So it was then that I tried plant medicines, and they really helped me, and they opened the doors. So what I like to say is psychedelics are not a cure. They're not going to be a silver bullet that's magically going to make all these issues go away. What they do is they really open the door to allow you to take back your own control over your healing process. Mm-hmm. It really gives you that notion that you are the medicine. You're able to work through these with more ease. And so after having that personal experience, I decided to study it more deeply from a neuroscientific perspective with my degree at King's College. And afterwards, I entered the business of the industry. So I began to work with a company that was investing in psychedelic therapies and the infrastructure to support them in an accessible way for clinical trials. And it was there that I realized that everyone's talking about psychedelics from the delivery of the medicine, right? What happens during the experience. But there's actually so much about what comes after. There's this big white space on integrating. What does that even mean? What happens once we leave a peak state, and how do we actually incorporate that back into our lives in meaningful ways? And so that's when I began to look more deeply in integration, and I started my business really to focus on this for people and to help people with their struggles and overcoming them more meaningfully.
Beautiful. And what would you say out of your personal psychedelic experiences, what has had the most impact on you in terms of which particular psychedelics, or would you say every type of psychedelic that you worked with has given you a unique experience in itself?
Yeah, so there's, for me, every experience is different regardless of the medicine. It depends on the set and the setting, as we like to call it. So the set is the mindset that we're entering it. Perhaps sometimes we'll work with psychedelics in a more clinical capacity, or it can be recreational, or there are so many different ways to approach. And for me personally, what actually has the most impact is the integration. It's how I actually translate those insights, those peak moments, and make them a reality for me. Yeah. For me, that's the most impactful, because we have this incredibly small window of opportunity during a peak state, which can be minutes, maybe hours, days, if we're lucky. And to have a way to actually bring those aha moments that we have, they can be really positive, but also challenging, and say, okay, I'm going to do something about this that's actually going to change my life. For me, it's that process that I find the most interesting part of all of this.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to answer the question, because I do feel like that's when we really ground, all these experiences, and the peak states are achieved on so many different levels, depending on the different combinations of psychedelics that you get drawn to, especially as a healing modality. So I think it's really interesting when you really focus on the integration piece as like the most impactful, relevant part for your own journey. Because I think that's something that a lot of people overlook. And I'd love to get your perspective on what you feel is most overlooked as an integration therapist.
Absolutely. So integration, as I said, is really about this capturing and synthesizing of insights from peak experiences, right? And we translate them into practices in our daily lives. We take the extraordinary We bring it back to the ordinary. We make meaning from that. And what I feel is overlooked is really in this process from the transition to integration. So transition is actually that moment right after the peak experience ends. So if you're in a more of a therapeutic context, it's when the therapist sits with the patient and helps them return back to a normal state. Often there's a short speaking or talking session. And then in more ceremonial contexts, you have a group sharing. And what I feel is during this transition period, when we're sharing, what's important after is actually to take the mind out of the equation. We've been many times working with the mind, right, to reach these peak experiences. And now what's overlooked is the allowing of the body to assimilate the experience, to take the body, to give the body time to rest, and to try and not make sense of the experience with the mind. So I often suggest that when people have a peak state, if they want to feel that they want to remember everything, you can write it down right away in a journal, but just write down what happened, not necessarily what that means. What is the interpretation of what happened? How are you going to do? What are you going to do about it later? What is sort of your reflection and synthesis? Don't try and use the mind at all right in the beginning. Let your body rest. Write down what happened so you don't forget, and then put it away. And I think that's something often really overlooked in this integration process. We're really used to being in that therapeutic role where immediately we want to go, we want to talk to the person, have them share all the details. But there is that moment where rest is actually very, very important prior to going back into the mind.
Yeah. So it's definitely more important to prioritize the feeling-based, I guess, assessment, you would say.
Yeah, let the feelings sort of settle, let the body assimilate, because we just reached this extraordinary state. And for many people, it can be very overwhelming. And if we try and put language to what happened right away, oftentimes that experience, the meaning of that experience can be lost. Really, the psychedelics, we think they're mind manifesting tools, but they're actually for the body and the soul and the emotions to have also a say. And so integration is really equalizing all these different dimensions.
Beautiful. And from a neuroscience perspective as well, there's a lot of new connections always being made right after that we go through these experiences. So what's really happening within us on a nervous system level that's allowing us to evolve, let's say, through these healing experiences?
Yeah, so there's something in research that we like to try to understand integration better through something called the afterglow effect. And the afterglow is the physical, mental, and psychological positive effects that linger after the peak experience ends. So peak experience, it can be up to a few hours. The afterglow is hours, days, sometimes weeks. And so what integration is really doing is it's extending that window for these insights to be assimilated. And so direct measurement of integration is still more qualitative in nature. It's still through psychotherapeutic intervention. So there's different measurement tools for that, to measure not only the physical positive changes, but also if anyone enters mystical states, there's mystical experiences that can be measured. But in terms of integration, yeah, it's about extending this afterglow, because the more we're in a position of feeling positive and having a positive outlook, the more likely we're going to make these changes and perhaps continue the changes that had begun before the experience itself. For example, when we're doing a specific type of medicine, oftentimes you're asked to refrain from eating sugar or salt, or to increase your exercise, or to make very simple but powerful lifestyle and dietary changes that oftentimes are continued afterwards. No alcohol, getting appropriate rest. And so this is this very interesting combination of working with the qualitative, emotional, somatic results of a psychedelic state.
Yeah, wow. it's so powerful on, I guess, the depths that it goes to within the body. And I'd love to ask you, like, if you could give someone one tool based on what you've already shared with us when it comes to getting out of the mind, but for anyone that might be experiencing and like exploring psychedelics for the first time and who might not have access to the right type of integration guidance, what tool would you give to anybody wanting to explore psychedelics for their healing journey that you think is the most effective? I'm sure they're all, I mean, it might be quite difficult to narrow it down to one tool, obviously, because it's a process of being and feeling. But if you could give them one tool of awareness, I'd love to know what that is.
Sure. So as you say, there is many different tools out there. And what I like to recommend people is that they continue to work on the practices that they were doing prior to a state. So usually before working with psychedelics, we don't just jump right into these peak experiences that accelerate us to these aha moments. We go slowly. So if somebody already has a meditation practice, for example, that tool for integration would be the meditation practice, because it's allowing you to deepen what you're already starting. The journey begins before you take the medicine and it continues long after. So what is that practice that you know and that you can deepen through the use of these substances? So for example, meditation is a really good one because it helps you to remain non-attached to the challenges, to the difficulties, and to be more in a state of observation of feelings, an observation of the thoughts that come and go. And for those of us who maybe enjoy writing, I say a journaling practice where over the next days, weeks, and then every so often, once a month, perhaps for 6 months, having a time to sit and to reflect on what's happened in your life since taking that medicine or working with that psychedelic. What are the things that you can reflect on? So these are some of the more basic tools that we can actually use that we can incorporate quite easily into our practice without much effort.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your insights and wisdom with us today. It was honestly such a pleasure to learn from you and get deep into, you know, what integration really is, because for me too, it's a whole new field in what as therapists we can learn a lot from as well when it comes to exploring all healing modalities. So I'm very grateful to have you with us today, and I'd love to invite you to a cognitive assessment that's been provided by CogniFit as a way of saying thank you and also ending this conversation with a fun little game. So
that's great.
You're ready, I'll make you a host, and
Sure.
we can have a little cognitive boost to kick off the rest of our day. So here you go. You should be able to share your screen now.
Great. Thank you, Christina. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So I'll get started. Eye coordination.
Tracking abilities. We're doing very well. This is to help with your visual and reasoning abilities. It's very peaceful to watch, I've got to say. I'm like getting into a little trance.
How am I doing?
100% accuracy so far, so not bad at all.
Great. This is fun. Ooh,
beautiful. Great. Nicely done. You did not flinch for a second. So thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in.